Hello and welcome to GlugNet. My name is Stephen Ball and I'm the president of GlugNet. Tonight we are pleased to welcome David Giard, who is going to be speaking to us about navigating the clouds using Azure Monitor and Application Insights. But before we get started, a little bit about us. We are the Greater Lansing user group for .NET developers, based out of Okemos, Michigan, as pictured here on this map. Our meetings are held every month on the third Thursday. They're free and open to the public, so we would love to have you. For more information on what we have coming up, the best way to find that out is to go to meetup.com/glugnet. Most of our meetups are recorded and posted to YouTube by Sam Nasser. You can either use the QR code there on the screen, or if you go to YouTube and go to @SamNasserMVP, you can find those recordings there. A few housekeeping items here. First of all, we are always looking to incorporate some lightning talks before our featured presentation. So if you are interested in doing a 10 to 15 minute lightning talk, you can either let myself know or Joe Kunk, and we will get you scheduled somewhere. Tonight's presentation is interactive. We encourage asking questions, answering questions from our presenter, etc. If you are unable to or uncomfortable speaking up, there is a chat feature in GoToMeeting. We'll be monitoring that for questions as well. Otherwise, we just ask that you please stay muted so that we can all hear and enjoy tonight's presentation. At the conclusion of tonight's presentation, there will be a survey given to all attendees. We are looking for feedback in two primary areas. First, how well did we as GlugNet promote this event? And second, what did you think of the presentation? Every bit of feedback we get is anonymous, so please give us your honest feedback, good, bad, or somewhere in between. And a summary of that is sent to our speaker so that he can improve this talk to other people. Our sponsors this evening, NIS Technologies, for providing this go-to session, and the .NET Foundation for helping to pay the bills for GlugNet. So without further ado, it's time for our featured presentation.
Thanks very much, Stephen. All right, let's talk about logging. Let's talk about Microsoft Azure. Let's talk about monitoring and application insights, all that good stuff. This is me. My name is David. I work for Microsoft. I'm an architect on the partner team. And if you want to read more about me or my thoughts or find out more, you can go to my blog. I write there, update that pretty regularly. I also have a couple of TV shows I hope you'll check out and smash that subscribe button. Technologyandfriends.com will take you to a show where I interview smart people about technology. Joe Kunk has been on the show a couple of times, and also GCast, aka.ms/GCast. These are 10 to 20 minute videos showing how to do a thing, something in technology. So check those out, please. I'm really excited. Actually, before I get started, I just want to say I'm really excited to be here. I wish I was there in person because I have a great fondness for mid-Michigan. I went to college in East Lansing many years ago, and I liked it so much that I convinced my son to go there as well. And I'm going to show off just a little bit here because I can't not do so. This is my son, Nick, when he played basketball at Michigan State University. Let's zoom in. He had a solid career as a walk-on playing for Tom Izzo. And that's me showing off as a dad. All right, let's get back to the presentation here. There's a temptation to believe that writing and deploying solid bug-free code is enough. That's enough for a successful software system. But software development does not end with the successful deployment of your software. It's a cyclical process. It's a whole software development life cycle, and so it requires feedback. And I, like a lot of software developers, at one time believed that I was finished once my software was written and deployed. That is a myth. And when I did start thinking about monitoring, I really only thought about it after my software was written. Is sort of, let's write the software, and then monitoring becomes an afterthought. Again, not the best thing. This monitoring should be an active part of the software development process, because it can do things like, well, let's talk about what it can do. It'll, come on, click, click, click. Compliance is a big one. So if we are, there are some industries that require a certain amount of information to be logged. They're actually required to do so, and there are tools inside of Microsoft Azure that can help you meet that obligation. Discovering problems, so keeping track of important measurables. You can determine when those measurables fall outside of an acceptable area that can lead to either demonstrate a problem or maybe an impending problem. So for example, if memory spikes or CPU usage spikes unexpectedly, then it might be an indication that we need to scale out our services. And that can be reactive or it can be proactive. In the terms of reactive troubleshooting, once we discover a problem, we can go back and look at the logs and find out what led to that problem. What historically happened to that problem. It's a good way of figuring out how, what went into the problem. We can help it to improve the system. And even if there's not a problem, we might want to proactively improve the system. So for example, we may want to determine which parts of the system are users actually using. Maybe there may be parts that we thought would be really popular and nobody's touching them. There may be parts we didn't expect to be popular and they are, but the parts that nobody's touching, that may be an indication either that this is a feature nobody wants, or maybe it's not very discoverable, or maybe it's not very usable, but this can be a first step to finding out about that. Finding bottlenecks in the system. Maybe the system does everything it's supposed to do, but it's running slowly or consuming extra memory, more memory than it should. We can make it more efficient by understanding where those problems are. Managing costs, there are a lot of monitoring tools which will tell you how much you're spending on your services. This is a big deal in cloud computing, because in cloud computing you are renting this compute power and the storage capacity rather than buying it. And sometimes it's not a good idea to wait until the end of the month when you receive your bill to discover, wow, I just spent a lot of money on that. To actively monitor those costs is a really good way to manage them. Managing complexity, monitoring can really help with that, because it's really difficult for us to hold everything about an application inside our heads. So keeping that in some sort of a storage system like logs will really help. And then improving security. By monitoring for suspicious activity, you can detect threats to your applications from outside or from inside your organization, often before they become a real problem. All right, this is the strategy that one uses for the general strategy for monitoring. The first thing is just implement some sort of monitoring strategy. Decide what you need to keep track of, log that information, and then decide when you're going to respond, how are you going to respond, who's going to respond. Keep measuring things, and as this is an iterative process, as you measure them, you want to look at what is acceptable to behavior, what is acceptable measurements to have, what is acceptable memory usage, performance, disk space, and this is an iterative process. As we go through this, we may refine what becomes acceptable. We may learn from it. We may modify our goals and use that to improve our system. But to do that, you really need to have a plan for your logging strategy. First thing you need to think about is, what am I going to monitor? And you can just say, oh, let's just monitor everything, every measurable for every service. You certainly can do that, but there is a cost to that. There's a cost in terms of dollars, because it does take some compute power, it does take some storage, but it's also a cost in terms of performance. It does take some CPUs to actually be monitoring everything, so it's probably not a good idea to monitor everything. And then also, if you have too much information, it may be very difficult to filter out what's useful inside of there. You want to think about what are the promises that you've made to your users. What are the service level agreements? Have I said that this is the response time is going to be at a certain level? Have we promised a certain amount of uptime? And if so, which systems have we promised this system? And which are the critical systems? You want to think about how are you going to respond when there is a problem? Who should be notified? And how are they going to be notified? Is it going to be just a report that they can look at on a dashboard, or are we going to send them a phone call or a text message or an email message? Really it depends upon, we'll talk about that later on, but it really depends upon what kind of a problem we're talking about here. And then you also want to think about your data retention strategy. Do we want to keep our data around forever? Probably not. We probably want to keep it around long enough that it's useful, and then maybe after a certain period of time, 3 months, 6 months, a year, whatever, either delete it or archive it to some low-cost cold storage where it's still available but not as quickly accessible. I want to show a couple of definitions here because I'm going to talk about these and I want you to understand what I'm saying here. Metrics versus log. A metric is just a number that represents a state of the system at any given time. So it could be the average CPU usage over the last 10 minutes, for example, is a metric. And it's an indication of the health of the system. CPU usage has been above 80% on average for the last 10 minutes. That could be a problem. A log is a record of the system over time. So logs may go into producing a metric. So measuring CPU usage every 10 seconds might be a useful thing to do, whereas the metric would be the average of those things. But it also could be things like, the user clicked a button, the user, this part of the system was activated, this database was called, all that information. And sometimes what we'll do is we will look at a metric, and when the metric shows some indication of a problem, disk space is really low, then we can go back to the log and we can analyze the log and say what led to that problem. So these things work hand in hand. They are very much related. The other distinction I want to make is between traces and spans, which are related but not the same thing. A span is a single piece of a workflow. User clicked a button. The system, the web application made a call to an API. The API called a backend database. It's just one piece of information. And that information can be logged into their monitoring system. A trace is a set of all of those spans that are for a single user or a single application. So if Joe and I each go to a website and we both click on the same button, I click on mine at 9 o'clock in the morning, he clicks on his at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, then we're probably going to generate similar traces, similar set of spans, but it may be that when I click it, I get an error, and when he clicks it, he does not. So we want to go back and look and say, what was different about mine? All the logs that are part of my span will be related. They'll have some ID, so we can relate them together, and we can say, okay, what happened to Dave's that was a problem? Looks like he did his at 9 o'clock in the morning. There was a lot of users online at 9 o'clock. That was a problem, or there was a system that was down at 9 o'clock in the morning. They couldn't make the API call, or something. We could tell exactly what failed in David's request that didn't fail in Joe's request. So that's what we use traces for. It's a collection of spans. Oh, sorry, I guess I didn't advance the slide there. Spans and traces. Excuse me. All right. This is the way that everything I've talked about so far refers to just monitoring and logging in general. This slide is about Azure specifically. Azure consists, the way it handles monitoring is we have data sources, and that data source could be Azure itself, the entire platform. It could be the services inside of the PaaS and the IaaS service and the SaaS service within Azure. Some of those have the capability of turning on logging. Sometimes for a lot of them, they're actually logged. Some of the information is logged automatically. As soon as you create the service, by default, they are logged. Some of them you can add additional logging to. And then, of course, you can write your own custom applications, and you can add logging to that. You can monitor those, so you know either what parts of the system are being used, or if an error occurs, maybe you want to log that information. And all that information is sent to the same place. It's sent to these logs. It's into the metric application inside of Azure Monitor. And from there, we can use tools like Application Insights to analyze it. We can use tools like Power BI to write reports against it. We can create dashboards so we can see everything at a glance, see multiple systems at a glance. We could even send it off to external services like Event Hub. So if we want some complex workflow to happen when a certain type of event occurs, then we could say, all right, when this happens, send it to an Event Hub, and we'd have some workflow that would subscribe to that Event Hub and it could fire off something very complex. We could also move it into Azure storage. We could move it into external APIs. There are a lot of third-party services that integrate really well with Azure Monitor and Application Insights. I created this slide just for my own. I'm going to talk about these things later on. This is for my own benefit. There is this idea of an application insight services, and within that, this points to a database that you can, the data store where you're logging your information and some analysis that's automatically done, but you can point multiple applications to it. You can put web applications and virtual machines and SQL Server and Azure Functions all to the same application insights service. And it points to something called a log analytics workspace. So there is a one-to-one relationship between application insights and this analytics workspace, which is where the data is stored and where you'll connect external applications to. But you can have multiple services point to the same one. You can also have multiple application insight services, which you connect to other log analytic workspace, and that might make sense if you wanted to keep everything within a single that are related within single related applications and log those together. Or if you have different customers, maybe you want to segment that in that way. If you have different services, you can think about it that way. But this is the relationship I drew mostly for my own benefit because it helps me as a longtime database guy to understand what a one-to-many relationship is and what a one-to-one relationship is. And you can have other application insights that point to the same log analytics workspace as well. So these things can be shared across. And sometimes that makes sense just for cost reasons. I'll talk about some of the things that you can do inside of Azure. The first one is the service health. Service health is a really nice feature. It's updated within minutes when a problem occurs. And what this does, tells you, is there a problem with Azure itself? And if so, where is that problem and what is that problem? So right now, I took the screenshot a few days ago. There didn't happen to be any problems. You can see that the legend up here says healthy. These are all the data centers. Actually, I didn't do this. I did this about a year ago because it's missing some data centers. But these are all healthy. There were no problems there. But if there had been a problem, let's say that, I don't know, SQL Server was down, or maybe not even down, maybe just was having issues, then we'll see a red triangle, but it's in the regions where it's having those issues. And if you hover over it and click on that red triangle, then it would show details of exactly what the problem is. So this is the first place you do when your application is acting up, is go here and see, was the problem me or is the problem Azure? It's possible that there's something wrong with Azure. So Microsoft's been pretty transparent about this, which is really nice. Now I want to talk about some of the ways that we can collect data. And these are logging, metrics, and alerts. I talked a lot about logging already. That's just taking these traces and just pushing them into a database. Somebody clicked a button. There was a call made to an API. There was the CPU usage at this time is 42.3%. Metrics are essentially their measurements at a given point in time. The CPU usage for the last 10 minutes was 47.2%. Alerts are, I'll talk about that in a second, but they are this idea that you can, when some condition happens with these metrics, we want to notify someone in some way. Send them a text message, send them an email, make a phone call, push to a mobile application, something like that. Application Insights is a tool within Azure, a service that monitors the performance of live applications and detects anomalies automatically. So this is an extension of Azure Monitor. It supports multiple platforms. It supports code in .NET, Java, Python, Node.js, and it helps developers to better understand their applications, how they're being used, and how they're performing. I will show you a demo in a minute, but creating an Application Insights inside of the Azure portal is pretty simple. You just click on New Application Insights inside of the monitor, and you give it a resource group and a name and a region, and specify which log analytics workspace. That's what points to the database it's going to use, and you can create a new one if you want to, or use an existing one. And this is so create it right here, and then within your applications, say a web application, for example. As I create that web application, there's this monitoring tab, which allows you to turn on, oh shoot, I keep forgetting to advance the slides, I'm sorry. Within an app, so this is the screen for creating a new application insight service. When you're creating a web app or a function app or many of the services inside of Azure, you'll notice a monitoring tab right here. And that monitoring tab asks you, do I want to enable application insights? And if you do, it'll ask you which application insight service do you want to point to. And if you don't point to one by default, it'll create a brand new one, but you can point to an existing one if you want to point multiple applications, multiple PaaS services to the same application insights. You can do that. And if you forget, if you change your mind later on, you can go back in and there's a toggle button that says enable application insights or disable it or link to a new application insights. So you have that kind of option. We also have health checks. This is really useful for just determining quickly whether or not this is something we could turn on inside of it, and it periodically will ping your service just to make sure that it's up and running and that it's healthy. And if it's not, then it'll remove instances from the load balancer if something is not. It doesn't return a proper ping. Virtual machines give a little bit more options, so more than just pushing data into an application insights data store. You could do things like automatically set up some alerts. You can automatically enable things like when a virtual machine boots up, record the information of that. So you have a lot more information that's available in a virtual machine. That's also available when you create a virtual machine on the monitoring tab and after the fact if you want to go back in and change those options. So let's see, let's go back to here. There's some investigative tools inside of Application Insights. Some of it is graphical, some of it's, this is just a really small dashboard for that lets you give a quick view of the health of an organization or health of a service in here. So this happens to be pointing to a web application, and it's the GET requests and how long they're all taking. This index page seems to be taking the longest page time. So if there's a problem with performance, you might want to look at that first, and shows it graphically over here on the right. SQL managed instances also have their own monitoring, and that dialog is a little bit separate. It's all done inside of the diagnostic settings, and here you can point to where you want to store that information. And there's also an SDK. So if you want to write custom code and deploy it, maybe you want to create a web application and deploy it to Azure App Services, you can do so, and you can include code in there to write to application insights and to write to Azure Monitoring. And there's a SDK for ASP.NET, ASP.NET Core, Android, Java, Node.js, Python. There are probably other ones as well. But you can write custom code. You're not limited just to the services, the PaaS services inside of Azure. This is the code for doing it right here. You need to add this package to your .NET application. This is actually for a .NET or a .NET Core application. And then this code right here, you'll create an application insights, and from there you'll grab an instrumentation key and replace this zeros with that instrumentation key. And here's some code. So this actually just sets it up. And then here's some code to actually add logging to your application. And same thing here, logger.loginfo, logger.info. ASP.NET applications by default automatically do dependency injection. They automatically have a logger injected into them, but that logger by default just writes to the console. If you want to do more than that, then you have to add something like this. You need to add a NuGet package, and in this case, it's going to log to wherever this connection string points to the application insights where that connection string points to. All right, alerts. I want to talk a little bit about alerts. I mentioned those earlier. This is the idea of an alert is that some sort of anomaly occurs. The application is slow or the memory usage is abnormally high, and you want to react quickly to these things. So by default, everything just pushed into a data store. You can run a report later on. You can have reports automatically generated, but if there's something that requires more immediate attention, an alert is a good idea. And the alert consists of three things. One is a signal, and the signal is just a piece of data that's recorded. You know, the recording the amount of memory that's being used. A condition is something that has to be true to indicate that there is a problem. Yes, we're recording all the memory usage, but if memory usage gets above, say, 60 or 75%, some value, that means it's a problem or a potential problem. We want to let somebody know, and letting somebody know is the action. And what action that is could be an email, could be a phone call, could be pushing to a mobile application, whatever. And when we start thinking about this, we have options. This is a good chart. If this is qualitative, not quantitative, but these are things to think about. What should the action be? And the two factors really are the urgency. Is it just informational? Did something happen that we don't really, doesn't really have a problem? Just recording some information. Probably don't want to have an alert set up for that. Maybe it's a warning, a potential error that might occur. Maybe it's an actual error. And maybe it's a critical. Critical will be something that's actually going to shut the system down. An error is something that maybe it's a glitch that occurs once in a while, or maybe it's just an indication that there might be a problem. And a warning is even less severe than that. So the severity of these goes up as these numbers get smaller. And then we also want to think about the impact. Is it just one system that's being affected, or is it a server on which we're running lots of systems, or is it a service to which other systems have a dependency? So if this system goes down, if this database goes down, for example, is going to take down everything else. If this API goes down, does that mean that all these other services that rely on that API are also going to go down? And that's what this is when we talk about impact. How many services are dependent on? How broad is the problem when this error occurs? So you can see that if you had a critical problem and it affects lots of systems, well, that's a critical issue. If you have just information affects nobody, that's not even worth alerting anybody. But as we move left along this and up along here, we start thinking about, whether it's an error or whether it's critical. Those are the things you want to think about. Do we want to create an alert for it? And if so, what kind of alert do we want to create? Who do we want to call, and how are we going to impact them? Do we need to wake somebody up in the middle of the night, or do we just want to send a text message to their phone or an email message to their inbox so they'll get it within a reasonable amount of time? And this is how you set up the alert rules in here. You can do everything I'm talking about. You can also do through the API, through the command line. You can do it through continuous integration. But within the portal, just there's an alert rules. You can click on create button and it brings up a screen like this. And you can set the scope, what you're going to actually measure, and the condition. In this case, this is the signal, it's response time. And this is the condition right here, average, greater than, medium. And you have an option here to say, is it, do we want to specify a static number? So in this case, what is this? Response time. Is the average response time greater than 500 milliseconds? Or we can say dynamic, which we say is the average response time greater than medium, high, medium, or low, and let the system figure out what that means, high, medium, low. We'll just use historical data to figure that out. And when we talk about things like averages down here, the look back period determines what that average is, the average over the last 5 minutes. And we're going to check every minute to do that. And then in notifications, actually, that's back over here. We've got actions. This is the actions here. Then we decide, okay, who are we going to send? Are we going to send an email, a text message, send a push notification to a mobile app? Or we're going to make a voice phone call? We're going to call an Azure function, all sorts of things like that. And if we check one of these things, we have to, for example, tell it what the phone call is, tell it what the phone number is, tell it what the email address is. All right, let me talk a little bit about that reporting and analyzing. There are metrics. Some of these are just built right in to Azure. Just create a service, and you can go and see. This one is for a web app that I created, and it just shows over time. It looks like I had a bunch of people hit it at what are we looking at here? The average memory. So a bunch of people must have been hitting it at a little after 6 p.m. This is probably when I created it, and nobody created it after this. It's probably just me testing it out. But I didn't have to do anything. I just created the web app, turned on metrics, and this is available to me. There are a lot of things like that. But for more information, you can write custom queries. And the way that you write custom queries is using a language called KQL. It stands for Kusto Query Language. Kusto Query Language works against a data store called Azure Data Explorer. So everything in Azure Monitor and Application Insights is written to an ADX, an Azure Data Explorer data store, which is a very fast, very scalable, read-only data store. Actually, the data store is not read-only. We can insert data into it, but KQL is a read-only query language. So because it's optimized for reading, it's very, very fast, and it's extremely scalable as well, because it's like petabytes of data can be stored in this. I've stored massive amounts of data in ADX data store. And then we use KQL to query. And if you're not familiar with KQL, this is what it looks like. I'm guessing there's a lot of people here who are familiar with SQL, structured query language. And if you know that, you can probably read this, because it has some similarities to SQL. In this case, there's a table called page views. You can see there's a where clause for filtering, and there is some summarization, like the sum, and then there's down here, there's order by. Projecting is just saying which columns to output. So in this case, I'm querying the traces table. So it's not identical to SQL, but it's similar to that. You should be able to read that. It also has some similarities to Bash, because Bash has this idea of the pipe character, and that says that the output of what's to the left of the pipe character becomes the input of what's to the right of that. So page views is an entire table. The where clause will filter the page views table, and after it filters it, then it will summarize the sum by timestamp, and then it has this nice render feature, so you can render. By default, it'll just return, rows and columns, rectangular data, just like SQL does, but you can render it as graphically as well, which is really nice. And you can do other things as well. There are a lot of built-in functions to do things like geo queries, for example, or I like this, the bin. The bin is a great feature where you could say, I want to summarize it with one row every 30 minutes, which is really cool. Finally, there's dashboards, and dashboards are, I guess not finally, but a dashboard is a way of looking at lots of different parts of the system and different measurements simultaneously. So you get a dashboard for one application insight service, and so that's one good reason to have everything, multiple applications that are related point to the same application insights service, because then you can see them all at a glance at a single dashboard. And this is a default dashboard, but you can customize this, and I'll show you how to do that in the demos in a few minutes. And you can also integrate with other applications. So Azure Monitor Application Insights, they've got lots of great features, lots of functionality, but maybe you really love Splunk or Datadog, which has even more features. These are services, they're deployed on Azure. You are able to subscribe to them. There's an extra cost to those, but if you really like those, or if your organization is already using them, you can take the data that's being captured by Azure Monitor and have Application Insights push it to one of these systems as well for even more functionality. And then we also have diagnostic settings. So diagnostic settings are associated with the login like workspace. The thing that I mostly use them for is for archiving, because what you can do is you can take some of your, after 6 months, you can say, by default, after 6 months, all the data will be deleted. Azure Monitor does not retain data more than 6 months. You can change that, but that's the default. But if you want to keep it around longer, then one solution is to push it to Azure Blob Storage. But you can do more than that. You can also push it to an event hub if you want to have some complex workflow coming in, or you can send it to one of those partner solutions like Datadog or Splunk or one of those other ones if you have those set up and subscribe to those through the Azure portal. Everybody always asks about pricing. I never memorize the pricing because it changes all the time, but I will say that there's this link right here. I'll give you a link to the slide deck, so you'll have this link as well. If I bring it up here, go. You can see that some of the factors that go into pricing are the amount of data, the number of queries you do. What is it? Half a penny per gigabyte of data queried. Exporting, if you need to export it somewhere. This gives you an idea. If you want to do replication, there is a cost to. Replication is nice if for redundancy, so fault tolerance. So this gives you an idea of what it is. This changes over time. It's a competitive environment, so that's why I never memorize them. But those are the factors that go into it. If you want to know the details, you can refer to that page. All right, we're getting to the end of the slides here. There's a few recommendations. One is we're monitoring for a reason. So often that reason is so that we can auto scale, so we can scale out. So if there's a problem, I keep bringing up the example of the CPU usage is high, or the disk space is low, or the memory usage is very high. That might be an indication that your application needs to scale more. And Azure from the beginning has supported auto scaling. Auto scaling actually works by its integration with Azure Monitor. It determines when is the right time to auto scale based on things like memory usage or CPU usage. In fact, you can set those rules up in your applications inside of your services. Set up the alerts. Be reasonable about the kind of alerts you want to set up. Think about actionable of alerts. What do you want to have an alert for? Who needs to be notified, and how should they be notified? And think about an archiving strategy. It doesn't make sense to keep data around forever. It's just a cost that you probably don't need to incur. You can either delete the data after a certain period of time, or you can archive it to a low-cost thing like Azure Cold Blob Storage, like that. So that depends on your needs, and it also depends on the regulation in your industry. Some places they require you to keep data around for a certain period of time. Here's some other links here to the Azure Monitor homepage, the documentation, some articles and videos that I created right here. Go ahead and let me click on that just to bring that up. Here's a bunch of articles I wrote on the topic. I wrote them all last year, so they should still be relevant. And here's a bunch of videos right here. And you don't have to, I didn't put the links there. This right here is a link to the slide deck. So if you want to quickly grab that, or actually what I'll do is I'll throw that into the meetup site. So if somebody wants to go back and look at this slide deck, they can do so. How do I do this? I'll just grab that tiny URL here, and I'll put it into the comments of the meetup site right there. So you'll have that. Comment appeared to contain spam. Seriously? Okay, I guess I'm not going to do that. I'll put it into the chat of there we go. There's the slides. Anybody wants the slides, they can go into that chat and find it there in the GoToMeeting chat. All right, and let's do some demos. I'm done with my slides. Where are we at here? We're about 30 minutes into it. Good timing. I haven't given this talk for a while, so it's one of the hard things about talks that you don't do very often is understanding the timing. All right, so let's see. I wanted to bring up the Azure portal, and let's start with the service health. So if I go into this Azure Monitor, so I have a link to it up here, but if I don't see that, you just search for Monitor right here. And there's Azure Monitor. Here's Application Insights right here. I've created a few of them. If I want to create a brand new, let's do that. Create a brand new Application Insights. Click on Create, and I'll put it in a resource group. I'll just create a brand new resource group. I'll call it GlugNet RG. Okay, and I'll call this application a GlugNut App INS. Put it in the East US, and I'll put it in, and for the log analytics workspace, that's fine. I'll just use this one right here and click on review. I could go into tags. Tags, almost everything in Azure has this ability to add tags. It's just name value pairs. It doesn't affect the resource at all. It just adds some metadata. So if you want to report on it later, you could filter or sort by that. So if you want to put, like, for example, department finance, then you could go back later on and find all of the resources that are tagged with department equals finance. So click on the review and create tab. It just tells me if there are any problems right here. If there are, then it'll tell me what those are, but it validated. I can click on create. It takes like a minute to create this thing. And while that's being created, I'm just going to go back over to here, back over to here. So you won't have to wait for it. And go back into monitor, and I'll show you things like over here is, I have metrics. Let me just search for them here. Here, and right here I can do things like select a resource group. Here's a resource group that I created today. You can expand that. And if I want to get some metrics on, this web app right here, I can apply that. And it'll show me metrics on this website. And I can even specify what metrics I want. I want the average memory working set right here. And I haven't hit this I haven't hit it. I only hit this thing one time, so there's not much to show on here. But this shows graphically what some of these things are. So I can see this just built right in to this. All right, let me go back to the application insights. Oh, it was created. It took about 60 seconds typically to create this thing. And in here, again, we've got some metrics. I don't really have anything to, I'm not really monitoring anything yet, but once I start monitoring things, it'll show up in here. What's the really powerful part of this is if I go in and I create something like a web app. So if I go back here, I'm going to grab a new, here's web app right here, create. And when I create it, I'm going to put it in the same resource group, glugnet RG. I'm going to give this app a name, glugnet web app, and all these things, .NET 8, Windows, that's fine. Let this thing refresh. That's fine, that's fine. I'll just take all the defaults here. And I do want to look at this monitor tab. I don't have a database or any deployment or networking features, but here I can specify for application insights. By default, it would create a new one here, but called with the same name as this web app. But what I want to do is I want to choose this one and send it to the application insight service that I just created. Click on review and create this web app right here. So now what I've done is if anybody looks at this web app here, and if things will just automatically monitor, just by turning that on, certain things will be automatically monitored and stored in Azure Monitor without me having to do anything. And I can do something similar with an Azure function. I'll do this again. So I can go through these a little quickly. I'm just going to a new tab. And I'll create a function, or a function app, I should say. Function app. Create that here. That's not what I want to do. I did something wrong. Close that. Azure function app. Here we go. Create that. And oh, why is this start? You welcome. Don't have a subscription. What do you mean don't have? Of course I have a subscription. Let's go back to here. Back to here. All right. There's my web app. This is deployed right here. All right, I'm back in the web app now. I'm not sure why the other tabs seem to bounce me to another subscription. But in my web app, if I change my mind and I want to go down here to Application Insights, I can enable or disable it from here after the fact, or I can change my resource. So if I wanted to point it to a different resource, different Application Insights resource, I could do that here as well. And that's what this does. We'll see that for a lot of things. We'll see that, for example, if I go and create a, let's try it on here, function app, create function apps. Yeah, that's what I wanted. The other tab, for some reason, bounced me into a different subscription. And here, I'll call this one glugnet func app. .NET is fine. .NET 8 looks good. Put that in the East US, Windows. And again, same thing. By default, it's going to create a brand new Application Insight service, but I don't really want that. I want to go and put it into the Application Insight service that I created earlier. I want this function app is related to that web app. I want them both logging into the same application insight service. So everything will be in the same data store. I'll be able to see them all on the same dashboard, all things like that. So I'll let that go. And just like this takes less than 60 seconds to deploy. So I don't know if I want to hang around for that, but it just like for the web app, I can go back later and change this if I want to. I can turn off application insights. I can change which app insights service I'm pointing to. Let's give it a second here. It's taking longer than I wanted to. So let me see what happens if I go back to this tab here. Yeah, it's deployed now. Okay, and just like before, if I come down here to application insights, I can change the resource right here if I want to. Let's say I didn't like, right now it's pointing to that one. Maybe I want to point to this one instead. If I create, I'll do something similar here just to show you. Virtual machines take a long time to create, so I won't go through the whole process. I won't hit deploy, but I'll just show you how we do it here. This is the Glugnut here, a resource group, virtual machine. I'll call it Glugnut VM. It's in the East US. Just take the defaults down here. They're fine. That's fine. That's fine. Size. I'll take. What's going on here? Size. What do you mean size not available? What does that mean? Size. The value must not be empty. Your subscription doesn't support virtual machines in the East US. Really? All right. Let's try West US. So we'll put it there. Huh. All right. And that's fine, that's fine, that's fine. I'm going to delete this right after this thing here. But I do want to go click on monitoring here. And you see you have a few extra options here. You could do, for example, by default, it's going to enable with managed storage account. That's good right here. It even tells you the estimated monthly cost, which I really like. It'll do guest diagnostics. It'll do application health monitoring. So it's just it'll ping it regularly, make sure it's working. Enable virtual machine. I'm not really sure what that does. Monitoring, and looks like it's pointing to a resource group right here. And there's somewhere in here is boot diagnostic. Maybe they've renamed it to OS guest diagnostics, but it'll actually monitor things while it's booting up, which is kind of nice. And this is, I haven't talked about alerts very much yet, but if you want to enable alerts, I'll show you how to do them manually. But for virtual machines, you have this option built in, turned on to say, whenever the CPU usage is better than 60%, or the memory is, available memory is less than 1 gigabyte, or the, what do I have in here? Network is greater than 500 gigabytes, etc. Then we want to fire an alert. And by default, it's going to send an email to me. But you can change that. You can, maybe I don't really care about that. I can turn that off, or maybe I care about this, but I want to change it. 80% isn't right. Maybe 70% is what I want. And you can tweak these things here, and you can tweak the output, the action that's going to occur. You don't have to hard code an email address here. You could hard code or just tell it what role, the owner of the resource, or all the contributors to the resource, things like that, etc. And I'll just turn that off. And it takes like 15 minutes to deploy a virtual machine, so I'm not going to hit create on this one. All right, let's see. I want to show you, I'll go back to that application insights that I created earlier. Maybe I can get some. I go to the resource group. Let me find that Glugnut resource group. Maybe I'll see if I can get some data in here. There's my resource group right here. And in here is this web app. And that web app is right there. And this is the default page that comes. I'll just hit refresh a few times, and I'll see if something shows up in here. It doesn't happen instantly because everything is stored in Azure Data Explorer. Azure Data Explorer is extremely scalable, and one of the reasons it's so scalable, why it can handle just massive amounts of data being thrown at it, is that it doesn't update in real time. There's a queuing mechanism, so there's an asynchronous update. So it's near real time, but it might be a minute or two before you actually see the data appear in there. It'll go into a queue, and then it'll get written, and that way it doesn't get bogged down if a gazillion services try to write to it at the same time. All right, so I should have some data in there. Let me go back to my application insights, which should be in that same resource group right here. Oops. In the same resource groups, glug net. I'm not sure where that second resource group came from, but oh well. And in here, there's my application insights right here. And one really cool thing that we have here is this application dashboard. Click on this button right here up in the overview tab. And this lets you look at all the things that are pointing to. I've got a function app, a web app. I didn't do the virtual machine, but you can have all sorts of things, a database, all pointing to this, and it'll tell you information about that. And these are called tiles. And you can modify, this is the default one, but you can create a new one. And when I create a new one, you'll see that there are templates that you can use, or you can create a blank one like this. I'm going to cancel that. I don't really want to create a new one. I want to go back to the default. Where's the default? Here we go, default one. And I'll just edit this one. There's a button up here that says edit. And when I edit it, I can do things like add tiles. So there are tiles for things like monitoring different resource groups or giving a user sign-in summary. There's all sorts of tiles that are built in, and each one has some properties that you can set. So I'll pick a simple one. The clock is a really simple one right here. And you can see there's only a couple of options here. I select the time zone. It knows I'm in the central time. I live in Chicago, so that's why I picked that. But if all my users happen to be in Arizona, maybe I want to pick that. And I can specify whether it's 12 hours or 24. So very few options on here. That's good. Set it right there. And I'll close this here. And you can also do things like resizing it. Right here, you have, there's only a couple of options. 1 by 1 or 2 by 1 are the only options for the clock. Other ones have much more broader. This one has a lot of other ones. You can resize it this way, like that, or you can resize it, is that this one? You can resize it by just dragging this corner right here and resize it like that. You can do that. You can drag them around if you want to move these things around. One thing I like to do is I like to add, let's go up to the top. Preview, add tile, brings this back up again, is identify the different parts of it. They've done it here, but there's markdown is one of the things. And I can put it here and put anything I want. First, there'll be a title, GlugNut demo. I'm going to put Go Green because I'm a Spartan. And then you can either, here's some default markdown here, but you can add your own markdown. Whatever, or you could point to a file on somewhere on the public internet that has that markdown here. So things like that, and that's kind of nice. That's what they've done up here. These are just labels for. Did I drag that on here? It's hard to tell. I think I added that somewhere. Why don't I see that? I must. Oh, here it is, right here. Right here. So now it's a lot bigger than here. And some of these have more, let me see, server exceptions have more options. Done customizing, configure the settings right here. So this one has different options. It depends on, this happens to be server exceptions and dependency failures and et cetera. Past 24 hours. No, I only want the past 30 minutes, things like that. Set those up. So all these things, if you want to see what it's going to look like, click on preview, and this is what it looked like for users when they do it, because they won't see it until you hit save. Hit cancel right here, and oops, I didn't mean to do that. I guess I lost all my changes, but I'll just do something simple here. Drop a clock right there. Drop a clock down there. There we go. preview it from here, and if I want to save it, then now I've updated. In this case, the default dashboard has been updated, and then I can share it with other people, and so I say exactly who can access thing, which roles are allowed to access this. It's a really powerful tool that allows insight into the health of a bunch of services all at once. And as I said, I've been using just the default one. Let's go back to here, but I can click create, and let's say I don't have any Cosmos DB stuff in here, but if I did, I would have to select a Cosmos to do that. So that's not a good example here. IoT Hub, SQL database. So these are specific to certain applications. Azure Inventory might be good. Just Azure demo. Submit that. And it has its own set, which you might like right out of the box, but you may want to tweak it a little bit and customize this one. All right, I'll just cancel that. All right, what else did I want to show you here? Let me see. Oh, how about alerts? Okay, this is my last demo. I'm almost at an hour. So for alerts, what I want to go is back into Application Insights. Right here, and bring up that GlugNet App Insights right here. And here's where I set alerts. And when I want to create a brand new alert, then I need to create an alert rule, specify the signal. Remember, there's a signal, a condition, and an action. So I'll say, all right, exceptions or server response time. How about server response time? That sounds pretty good. And here, it depends on, actually, these other questions change depend upon what I select up here. But I'll say, like if I said exceptions, then it's different. But I'll just go server response time. And you can see that if I want to specify the average is greater than 1,000 milliseconds, I can do that. I can hard code a number in here, or I can specify dynamic and say average is greater than or less than, there's an option, greater than medium, and let the system figure out what medium is. So after it gets some historical data, it said, oh, generally this thing takes about 500 milliseconds. If it gets high above that, then I want to fire this alert. So this is the condition right here, and we've got some options. It doesn't have to be average. It can be average, maximum, minimum. It can be, doesn't have to be greater than. It can be greater than. It can be less than, greater or less than. So maybe you only want always to be within a certain range. If it gets too high or too low, those are both problems. And then, and you can filter this further by selecting dimensions. So maybe you want to have like only care about these if the from certain roles, or maybe only if this historically would give you what's been returned already, but only if you get a 400 return. Maybe you only care about it then, or only a 200 return, things like that. This tells it how often to check it every 1 minute or 5 minutes, whatever. And this tells it when we use things like average or min or max, that doesn't really have any meaning unless we say average over a time period. That'll go back every minute. It'll go back over the last 5 minutes and check the average to see if it's greater than abnormally high numbers. All right, and then once I do that, then I'll just hit next. Then I specify actions. And in actions, use things like action groups. So I can create a brand new action group here. I'll call this one GlugNet action group. We were going to create action groups because they can be reused across multiple roles. I've already set the signal and the condition, and then it doesn't really matter what I call it here, except yes, it does matter. And no more than 12 characters. There we go. And it says the action is I want to email this clown right here, or I want to email this role right here, or I want to send a mobile application. And I have to select the mobile application. I don't have anything set up for that, so I can't do that. But I could do multiple. I could check more than one of these things. And click on Save here. I'll just click on email myself right there. And now I've got an action group. If I wanted to have another signal condition point to the same action group, I could do that. Let's go to next. Details here. I probably want to give this, where am I going to store this information? Let's do that. I'll call it glugnut rule. Glugnut rule, that's fine right there. Resource group, that's good. And what's next? Tags, we don't really care about. And let's see, everything looks okay. Click on create. It's gonna be hard to test this because I don't have, it'll be hard to force the server response time to be more than high. But there's a rule that's created in here, these alerts, and I should be able to see them. Why don't I see them? Is there a refresh? Alert rules, here we go. And there it is right here. One was created automatically for me somewhere along the line for something. But there it is right here. So if I change my, well, first of all, I can disable it. Sometimes I want to create a rule that I don't want to implement right away. Or I can edit this and change it, any one of these things right here. Maybe it's, I don't want it to be dynamic. I want it to be 1 second. And save that right here. Those were my demos and my slides, and I hit 1 hour almost exactly. Let me look over here and see if there are questions. I think I saw one question somebody else answered. That's cool. So somebody asked about Power BI template libraries for the Azure monitoring tools. Yes, so Power BI, you can connect it to SQL Server, you can connect a lot of Azure Blob Storage, and you can connect it to ADX, Azure Data Explorer, which is where everything is stored in Azure Monitor. So, and you can use KQL to query that in there. Since we use legacy SQL Server reporting service and Power BI report server both on-prem, is it easy to connect to endpoints with the logs you've mentioned in Azure? Absolutely. Yeah, so the logs are stored in ADX. And I'm guessing there's a lot of people on here who have never heard of Azure Data Explorer, ADX, or Custo Query Language, KQL, but it's been public for about 2, maybe 3 years, probably about 3 years, but it's been around for about 5 years before that because Azure Monitor's been using it the whole time. And other services have been using it. Like, for example, if you open up Microsoft Office, the first time you install it, it asks you, do you want to send feedback back to Microsoft? And if you say yes to that, then your usage information is actually pushed to a web service at Microsoft and stored in ADX. And that's, as you can imagine, that's a massive amount of data that's being stored there. And there are a lot of internal systems as well that have been stored in ADX. So it's been around for a long time. And let's see. That's the only question I see. Are there other questions? Well, if that's the case, then move this thing out of the way. Thank you very much.
Hey, Dave, can I throw a question in there at the end?
Yes.
So one thing I just want to kind of make sure it's clear. If we have applications that run on-premise, would it make sense to use this service and telemetry for logging internal applications, or do they only make sense for Azure-based applications?
That's a great question. It is available for internal applications. And in fact, if you create a custom application and use the SDK, then I don't have a demo code to show you. And the reason I don't have a demo code is because they changed the API. It deprecated the API, but I'll bring this back over here. In here, when you write your code for a custom application, I have a slide for it somewhere here. You can run this on premises and point it to a connection string in the cloud.
Okay.
So as long as you have that connectivity, of course, if you lose connectivity, then it just won't work. But But yeah, absolutely. That's you can do that. In fact, you could run this code in AWS and have it captured in Azure Monitor.
Great. Yeah, because that opens up a whole new use case for it. So I just want to make sure.
Okay. So you haven't migrated everything to the cloud?
We've got a few things yet that aren't.
Yeah, I get that. All right, awesome. I'm gonna I'll throw this up one more time here. That if you want these slides, you can grab those. Also, let me show you. I'll show you give a couple more links. You do have these links here, stuff that I've written. Essentially, a lot of the stuff that was in this presentation are in these articles and in these videos. And I do have, yeah, I guess that's it. Those are the links that I was going to show you. You already have them. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, if I can figure out how to do that. I have no idea how to stop sharing my screen. Oh, there it is right there. Yay. Oh, camera view attached. What? All right, I'm back. Stephen, I can't hear you. Are you speaking? Do you hear me? Not if you can hear me. Huh. Computer audio. Steven said his headset is not working.
Okay. I hear you just fine, Dave.
Okay, but you cannot hear Steven though, right?
No.
Yeah, let's try this. Any better?
Oh, that worked. That worked. Okay. The floor is yours,
Yeah.
Mr. Ball.
Thank you. So I put the link to the survey in the chat. If everyone could please fill that out, that would be very much appreciated. I'll leave that open for about 24 hours, and then I'll get a summary of that to you, David, with all the results.
Oh, I appreciate that. You know, I just saw something in here. Somebody talked about free reference manuals out there for KQL. I actually did a lot of work with KQL a couple of years ago, and everything I know, I tend to write down somewhere. And I have on my blog, let me see if I can find this. Here, a whole bunch of videos and articles about ADX and KQL, which I am going to share in the chat right there. So if you're interested in how to use ADX and KQL, there's a whole bunch of information that as I was learning it, I wrote it down. They're mostly notes to my future self. That's what my blog is, but you may find that useful. And it starts with basics and goes to more advanced if you read those in order.
All right, any other questions before we go?
All right, it's been a pleasure. I hope to make it physically to mid-Michigan soon. I want to get back to right there.
Sounds good.
All right, thank you, David.
Thank you very much, David. Have a great night, everybody.
Bye-bye.